I'm really passionate about food. How about you all? You love to eat good, locally raised food? Well, I do too. At our farm, Moss Mountain, we focus on diversity. I think diversity is so important. We trial hundreds of different types of fruits and vegetables every year. It's a real keystone to what we do. I think conserving and preserving genetic diversity is the future. You know, I just wonder if any of you have had a food epiphany, where you've tasted something for the first time and it just sort of rocked your world. Maybe the first time you tried a Snickers bar. No, maybe not that. But this idea of tasting something for the first time that really changed your perception of the world, made you think in a different way. This happened to me. I was a graduate student in England. I was invited to a house party. Came time for dessert at dinner, and the lady of the house said, "We're going to have apples." I thought, "Oh, great, I love apple pie." She said, "No, we're going to try apples." And so out of the orchard around this house, there were 12 different types of apples. Some named, some not. And we began to have an apple tasting, slicing into them and tasting them. And I couldn't believe the range of flavors coming from this single fruit, apple. It was marvelous, absolutely marvelous. I began to dig around and learn about apples, and I realized that very quickly that we'd lost so many apple varieties. It was tragic. In the 19th century, 7,500 named varieties of apples, with wonderful names like this one. My favorite's over there, "Bastard Seek No Further." Sadly, it's gone. But the idea really stuck with me, this whole idea of genetic loss. Today, if you go to the grocery store, what do you see? 5 varieties? Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, good old Granny Smith, maybe a Gala, a Fuji, possibly a Macintosh, and there's where it stops. So how did this happen? Well, economic pressure, really. It's just out of efficiency. It's more costly to produce lots of varieties rather than a few varieties. Also, you want them all the same shape. They need to be similar in form. Then we move to foods needing to be able to be transported and have a long shelf life. And through that, what we lose is flavor. But more than that, what we lose is genetic diversity. And that's so important because this diversity really is these are the building blocks of our food system. They're the tools in our toolbox. These tools are so important for us. It's the more tools you have, the more problems you can solve, right? So cultivating and conserving these ideas or these foods is really, really important. These foods, the genetics of these old varieties and even new ones, can help us solve problems in the future. Now, you go to a modern supermarket today, there's no end to the diversity of processed foods, right? I think the last time I looked, about 40,000 varieties of things one can buy in a supermarket. 40,000, which is absolutely amazing to me. I mean, to think about it, none of these things are going to go extinct. Well, the Twinkie went extinct, but they brought it back. 3,000 apple varieties die, and they bring the Twinkie back. Chickens are like apples in that they are incredibly diverse. And they offer so much to us in our food system. Chickens are a great passion of mine for a number of reasons. I became interested in them because of their genetic variation. Then I began to learn how chickens feed the world. Chickens also were sort of that second epiphany that I had as a child. This idea that, well, a man told me once, he said, take it, if you can catch this chicken, you can have it. So I get this chicken, I bring her home, and I'm amazed at the number of eggs she lays. We eat the eggs, they're the best eggs I've ever had in my life. So, well, I become addicted to chickens in a big way. My sister had all kinds of animals. She had dogs and cats and birds and gerbils and hamsters. I had a chicken. She made fun of me, and all I would say back to her is, how many eggs have you gathered from your gerbils? So I made my point. At Moss Mountain Farm, we keep about 40 varieties of heritage chickens. These are breeds that go back really almost 2,000 years. It's a conservancy. We have the Heritage Poultry Conservancy there. And these birds are the birds that have fed us up really up until the 1950s. And they're amazing in their variations. Just look at the colors. Look at the patterns of the feathers and the shapes of them. These are the foundational birds of the birds that we have today. They're really quite amazing and extraordinary. And so what we have is a living museum there of these different breeds. This looks like a fashion show here. I thought it was better to show you a video rather than run them across the stage. But it's these birds that really have fed us, well, up until the 1950s when the industrial chicken came along, the egg layer and the broiler. So what's all this squawk about chickens? Well, it's quite amazing what's happened in this country. Since 1950 to the present, look at the amount of chicken we have consumed, we now consume. It's really quite amazing. From 1.4 million pounds to 40 million pounds in this country. And worldwide, it's staggering. Chickens are on a trajectory you cannot believe, which is important because if you look at where we are with the population, by 2050, there'll be over 9 billion people on the planet. And the biggest growth sectors you can see up there are China and India. So it's so important that we maintain genetic diversity in chickens, but that's not what is going on. Here, you have primary breeder companies. In the 50s, there were well over 100 of these primary breeder companies. Primary breeder companies are companies that provide breeding stock that then sell the eggs to production hatcheries. We're down to 3 globally now, held by holding companies, 3. Hold all the genetics for chickens in the world. So what we have is the spiraling upward movement of need for chickens because of population growth and this downward spiral of genetics. We've created a monoculture of birds. In junior high, we all learned about the Irish potato famine, right? The focus on a single or just a couple of varieties of potatoes, and we know the result of that. So it's a very serious issue. I think also choice plays a role in how animals are raised. Most of us are so removed from our food system today that the closest we come to a live chicken is driving by a truck like this and seeing them loaded going off to slaughter. And it's a serious issue. We're that disconnected to our food system. But what would be wonderful would be if we could begin to shift the agricultural system in some way, not totally, but in a way that local communities could begin to produce some of these very important genetics alongside the industrial farm complex. Now just take a look at this. Look at what, from 1957 over 2005, look at what has happened to chickens genetically. So now, in 56 days, they're producing a 9-pound bird, 56 days. And look at where we were in 1957. Pressure against these birds to produce meat with less food has resulted in this, to the expense of other qualities, to the expense of genetic diversity. What happens is when you're not breeding for immunity, when you're not breeding for bone density, vigor, then what happens is you become susceptible and vulnerable to disease. This was just recently, this was what, 2 months ago in Iowa. 30 million birds dead because of avian influenza. Not contagious to humans, but look at what it's done to this population. And when have we had food rationing in this country? Second World War? This is the headline with the Washington Post. So what is the solution? How can we conserve these very important genes? Not only with chickens, but across the board, because it's happening across the board. I'm just using chickens today as sort of the poster child for this talk. Well, we have libraries, if you will. We have repositories of genetics. This is one in Norway. We have them in Colorado, the United Kingdom, where seeds are held. 4,000 species, over 10,000 varieties of seeds are held in case of, some sort of calamity. And they're also shared along the way. For animals, for mammalian genetics, for our food source, Swiss Village Farm Foundation, a private foundation, has been working with Tufts University, as well as with the Smithsonian, to save these mammalian genetics. This is a belted Galloway cow, great old breed, and sheep. And what they're doing there is that they're conserving genetics, the egg and sperm of these breeds. And they're doing it cryogenically. And this is a way to make sure that 400 years from now, they can take the egg and sperm of those animals and they can put them into a surrogate and produce that same flock 400 years into the future. Now, the problem is there is not a similar system for poultry. It's more complicated. What we really need is a global genome project for poultry because it is so important to feeding the world. It is the #1 protein consumed. So there is work being done currently where the reproductive tissue of these various breeds of poultry is being cryogenically preserved with the idea of reintroducing it at a later date to an embryo to be able to produce those breeds. So it could be a way to conserve these breeds, not only some of the industrial breeds, but certainly these great old heritage breeds and even wild breeds of chickens, land-raised chickens that we would find worldwide to be able to save because they all offer something genetically. Now let's talk about what we can do. There is really an opportunity here for all of us to play a role in conserving these genetics. And it's about harnessing this idea to the burgeoning local food economy and the system that's underway. What's interesting is that we are seeing, well, since 2002, there's been a 60% increase of direct sales from farms to people, i.e. farmers markets would be a great example of that. How many of you like to go to the farmers market? Raise your hand. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And what's also interesting is that the University of Georgia came up with a study that underscores the economic importance of this. They found that for every 5% of food produced and sold locally, they saw a $44 million increase and about 345 jobs for every 5% sold. So it makes economic sense. So if you begin to look at the map of the US and you think about, all right, so how could we take communities, say, that are over 200,000, And if you drew a radius around them, whether it was 25 miles, 50 miles, or 75 miles, and we began to support local farmers, you see these spotted in green around there, or producers, then processing plants. We've lost so many processing plants where these processors could then process, in the case of meats, chicken, swine, cattle, and so forth, and then food hubs and co-ops, which are so important. And then the farmers markets, which would be closer to the inner cities. This would be a way to stimulate sales. It would create more national security for food. It would keep dollars in our communities. It would increase jobs. And again, that genetic diversity could be conserved. Now, the direct-to-the-consumer delivery is an idea that I think that is really exciting, because we can take technology, pull out my cell phone with an app on it for Uber. We all know the Uber model, where there is choice. You can be picked up in a Camry and taken to a restaurant, and then you can be picked up by a town car and taken home. So this idea of being able to have your food delivered directly from either a food hub or a farmer or a farmer's market is a way we could go. And this would be a way to help conserve genetics. One of the things that we have to do here is that we have to really train these farmers. We have to train the food hub operators and bolster the distribution system that we have around these cities. But I think it's a way that could work. And if you look at this entire country, these are cities that are all over 200,000 in terms of their population. So you can see that by producing this food locally, sort of the impact you could make across the country. So by us embracing diversity, what we do is we improve our own lives, our families' lives, certainly our communities, as well as the country. Thank you very much.
That was terrific.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Alan. So what kind of programs are underway right now? Those are all terrific ideas. And Salil let me know earlier that maybe the direct food delivery idea
Wouldn't that be great if that could happen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that
I mean, we can order a pizza, right? So why can't we order fresh corn and maybe some locally raised bacon and eggs? Wouldn't that be great?
So can we get people together here in the local community? There's a great startup and technology community here in Central Arkansas. Couldn't we be the birthplace of that technology to actually make that happen?
Why not?
Are there any programs like that that are underway that you're aware of?
There are a few. I know there's one going on in Europe currently. So there are some models to follow. But I really think that time is an issue. You see, the problem I find with farmers markets and the way we live our lives today is that, it's not always convenient to go. I love to go. It's a social activity for me. But we don't really have time. So if we could have a delivery system where this local food could be delivered directly, then that would be fantastic. Yeah.
So we have the DNA storage facilities in Norway and in Colorado.
Right.
Are we doing anything like that with, you talked a lot about the chickens, are we doing anything like that with and of course we watched the video earlier with Stuart Brand. Are we doing anything where we're collecting the DNA of these animals to?
Well, DNA is being collected for mammalian genetics for livestock. And I'm really focused on food systems. And there have been a lot of talks about wildlife, and that's so important. I mean, we must preserve the natural ecology. But what I've been talking about is sort of the farm ecology. But yes, there is work being done. I mentioned Swiss Village Farm Foundation. They're doing a fantastic job. But what doesn't exist is some sort similar program that is conserving avian genetics, chickens, and turkeys. And I think, that's a doomsday scenario. But at least we're conserving them, and we can use those genetics if we do have, avian influenza is just one thing. There are many other pandemics that we have to be worried about.
Does the diversity, I'm obviously not a geneticist, we'll have to have Karama come back up. Does the diversity within the gene pool, does that actually affect the incidence of these type of avian flus?
Well, I mean, genes are marvelous, and the more you have, and the more diversity you have, is that there's more likely that you'll find a strain that has some sort of immunity, has resistance to these diseases. So the more you have, the higher the likelihood is that you may find something. Yeah, but if we narrow it and we keep losing them, more tools, more solutions, just as I said. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Right.